Millionaire CEO adopted 4 unwanted kids. What they did years later will break your heart. Before I share this incredible story, tell me, where are you watching from? I love seeing all your locations. The morning sun glinted off the sleek glass exterior of the Grant Enterprises Tower, casting prismatic reflections across the Manhattan skyline. Inside his penthouse office, Maxwell Grant stood motionless at the floor-to-ceiling windows, surveying the city that he had, in many ways, helped build. At 52, Maxwell had achieved everything society deemed worthy of pursuit: unimaginable wealth, global influence, and a reputation for business acumen that bordered on the prophetic. "Mr. Grant," came a gentle voice from the doorway. "Your 9 o'clock was canceled, and the Tokyo investors need an answer by noon." Maxwell turned to face his executive assistant, Victoria Chen. 20 years as his right hand had given her an uncanny ability to read his moods. Today she noticed the slight downward turn of his mouth, the distant look in his steel-gray eyes. "Thank you, Victoria," he replied, his voice carrying the refined edge of someone accustomed to being heard the first time. "Tell Tokyo we're in, and reschedule the afternoon budget meeting. I need to review the European numbers before making any decisions." Victoria nodded, making notes on her tablet. She hesitated, an unusual behavior that immediately caught Maxwell's attention. "Something else?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "The charity committee sent up the list of events for your approval," she said, swiping through her tablet. "There's a new addition, an orphanage fundraiser next Thursday evening. Riverdale Home for Children." Maxwell's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "I've already committed to 5 charity events this quarter. That's sufficient. They're specifically requesting your presence, not just a donation," Victoria persisted, unusual for her. "The board feels it would strengthen our community outreach image, especially after the manufacturing controversy last month." Maxwell turned back to the window, his reflection staring back at him. Impeccable charcoal suit, silver-streaked dark hair, and eyes that had grown colder over the years. He recalled the headlines: Grant Enterprises closes American factory, ships 300 jobs overseas. The decision had been financially sound, but had created precisely the kind of publicity his PR team had warned about. "Fine," he conceded. 2 hours maximum. That evening, Maxwell's private elevator carried him to the underground garage where his driver Harrison waited beside the black Bentley. The ride to his Westchester estate was silent as always. Maxwell reviewed contracts on his tablet, occasionally dictating notes for Victoria to find in the morning. As the car passed through ornate iron gates and up the curved driveway, Maxwell's sprawling mansion came into view, a masterpiece of modern architecture nestled among old-growth trees. It was a showpiece featured in architectural magazines, but as the Bentley's headlights swept across its facade, Maxwell was struck by the darkness of the windows. No lights welcomed him home. Harrison opened his door. "Will you need me again? Tonight, sir?" "No, Harrison. Thank you." Maxwell straightened his tie, a habit born of decades in the spotlight rather than any actual dishevelment. Inside, the house was immaculate, silent, and empty. His footsteps echoed on marble floors as he moved through the soaring entryway. The cleaning service had been as they did 3 times weekly. Fresh flowers stood in crystal vases. A fire had been laid but not lit in the main living room. Maxwell bypassed the formal dining room where 18 chairs surrounded a table that had never hosted a family meal. He entered the kitchen, a chef's dream of stainless steel and granite that he rarely used, and pulled a bottle of Macallan 25 from a cabinet. The heavy crystal tumbler made a satisfying sound as he set it down, pouring 2 fingers of amber liquid. He carried his drink to his study, the one room in the mansion that felt like his. Family estates lined the walls, not of the Grants, who had come from nothing, but of the historical figures Maxwell admired. Edison, Carnegie, Rockefeller, men who had built legacies. Settling into his leather chair, Maxwell opened a portfolio containing the latest acquisition proposal. However, his focus drifted to a small silver frame half hidden behind a stack of financial journals. He rarely allowed himself to look at it directly, but tonight he reached for it, wiping a thin layer of dust from the glass. A young woman's face smiled, back at him. Rebecca. Dark curls framed delicate features and eyes that had once looked at him as if he were something more than his bank account or business deals. They had been university sweethearts. He the scholarship student with grand ambitions, she the talented artist with dreams of teaching. 25 years had passed since she disappeared from his life without explanation, leaving only a brief note. "I'm sorry, Maxwell. I can't do this anymore." It had been the first time, perhaps the only time, something he truly wanted had slipped through his grasp. By the time he had the resources to find her years later, the trail had gone cold. He often wondered what had become of her, if she had found happiness, if she ever regretted leaving. Maxwell returned the frame to its hiding place and drained his scotch. Success had filled his bank accounts, but had never quite filled the void Rebecca left behind. He had dated occasionally over the years, beautiful, accomplished women who understood his lifestyle, but none had pierced the armor he'd built around himself. His phone vibrated with a text from Victoria. "Confirmed for Riverdale Home for Children, Thursday 7 p.m. Car will pick you up at 6:30. Maxwell set the phone down without responding. Another charity event, another tax deduction, another evening of smiling for cameras while writing checks that meant nothing to a man of his wealth. As he prepared for bed in his cavernous master suite, Maxwell caught his reflection in the bathroom mirror. Despite his tailored clothes and carefully maintained physique, he looked tired. Not physically, his personal trainer would never allow that, but somewhere deeper. He climbed into his king-sized bed, alone as always, and asked the house system to turn off the lights. In the darkness, the emptiness of the mansion seemed to press in around him. Tomorrow would bring more deals, more millions, more of the same. What he didn't know, couldn't possibly imagine, was that in just 3 days, his carefully constructed world would be turned upside down by 4 children no one wanted, and that beyond the walls of his empty mansion, fate had set in motion a chain of events that would change everything. The limousine glided to a stop in front of Riverdale Home for Children, a weathered brick building with peeling paint and windows that had seen better days. Maxwell straightened his custom tie, mentally starting his 2-hour countdown. "Remember," said Claudia Porter, his PR director, beside him. "Just a few photos, with the children, then your speech, and the donation presentation." Maxwell nodded curtly. "Let's get this over with." Inside, the orphanage director, Mrs. Winters, a woman with kind eyes and gray-streaked hair, greeted them effusively. "Mr. Grant, what an honor. The children are so excited to meet you." The main room had been decorated with handmade signs and streamers. About 30 children of various ages sat cross-legged on the floor, their faces a mixture of curiosity and rehearsed politeness. Maxwell delivered his speech mechanically, words about community responsibility and investing in our future flowing easily from years of practice. Cameras flashed as he presented, an oversized check, and he smiled his media smile. Confident, generous, but never reaching his eyes. "Would you like a tour?" Mrs. Winters asked afterward. "I'm afraid Mr. Grant's schedule is quite tight," Claudia interjected. "Actually," Maxwell said, surprising himself, "a short tour would be fine." As they moved through the building, Maxwell noted the worn furniture, the outdated facilities, the makings of a place doing its best with insufficient resources. The children they passed stared at him with a mixture of awe and wariness. "And this," Mrs. Winters said, opening a door at the end of a hallway, "is our special projects room." Inside, 4 children worked quietly, separate from the others. A teenage girl with serious eyes supervised a younger boy struggling with math problems. Nearby, a small girl with wild curls painted intensely, while a boy about 10 assembled a complex structure from recycled materials. "These are our special cases," Mrs. Winters explained in a lowered voice. "Emily, Daniel, Sophie, and Michael. They've been with us the longest." "Why weren't they at the presentation?" Maxwell asked. Mrs. Winters hesitated. "Emily has anxiety in crowds. The others, well, they're a package deal." Emily won't be separated from her siblings, which makes placement nearly impossible. Their time with us is almost up, unfortunately. What happens then? Maxwell found himself asking. They'll likely be separated into different foster homes. Emily's age makes her particularly difficult to place. Something about these 4 children captivated Maxwell's attention. The girl, Emily, looked up, meeting his gaze with surprising directness. "Hi," Maxwell said, uncharacteristically awkward. "Are you the rich man everyone's been cleaning for?" she asked bluntly. "Emily," Mrs. Winters scolded, but Maxwell raised a hand. "It's all right." "Yes, I suppose I am." "Why?" the younger boy, Daniel, asked. "Why am I rich?" Maxwell replied, confused. "No, why do you care about this place?" The question caught Maxwell off guard. In his world, people didn't question his motives. They simply accepted his generosity with gratitude. Before he could answer, the smallest girl approached, offering him her painting, a surprisingly skillful portrayal of what appeared to be, family. "It's not finished," she said softly. "I can't get the daddy right." As Maxwell took the painting, a strange feeling washed over him. Recognition, connection, something he couldn't name. These children, unwanted by the world, stirred something long dormant inside him. "Mr. Grant, we should go," Claudia reminded, checking her watch. But Maxwell wasn't listening. A decision was forming, impulsive, irrational, and absolutely clear. "Mrs. Winters," he said, his voice different than before, "I'd like to discuss adoption options." "You've completely lost your mind," Richard Hargrove declared, pacing Maxwell's office. As Grant Enterprises' legal counsel for 15 years, Richard had witnessed Maxwell's calculated decisions, but never anything like this. 4 children, Maxwell. 4. You've never even had a pet. Maxwell remained calm, watching the Manhattan skyline. "The paperwork is filed. Home studies begin next week." Victoria entered with a stack of documents. "The contractors arrive tomorrow to renovate the East Wing. I've scheduled interviews with 7 nannies and the school applications are being processed." Richard threw up his hands. "The board is in an uproar. Business Week wants an interview about your sudden family man image. Your shareholders will enjoy the 18% profit increase this quarter," Maxwell interrupted. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a family to prepare for." 2 weeks later, Maxwell stood in the transformed East Wing of his mansion. Sterile minimalism had given way to color and warmth. 4 bedrooms, each designed to match personalities he was just beginning to understand. Emily's in sophisticated blues with a writing desk, Daniel's with built-in bookshelves and a junior science station, Sophie's with an art corner and rainbow accents, Michael's with music-themed decor and a keyboard. "Mr. Grant?" called Mrs. Harper, the matronly housekeeper he'd hired. "They're here." Maxwell's heart raced as he descended the grand staircase. Mrs. Winters stood in the foyer with the 4 children, their belongings in mismatched bags at their feet. Emily, 15, positioned herself protectively in front of the others. Daniel, 10, observed everything with analytical curiosity. Sophie, 7, clutched her sketchbook tightly, while Michael, 8, stayed unnervingly silent. "I'll create Chapter 4 with approximately 3,000 characters as requested. Chapter 4, The Billionaires Club." The mahogany doors of the Metropolitan Club swung open as Maxwell entered, nodding to the doorman who had greeted him by name for 20 years. Every month, New York's financial elite gathered here, men and women who controlled the fate of global markets over brandy and cigars. Tonight, however, was different. Conversations paused as Maxwell crossed the room, whispers following in his wake. "Maxwell, heard you've become a regular Father Flanagan," called Philip Westover, CEO of a rival investment firm. "What's next? A reality show?" Polite laughter rippled through the group gathered around him. "4 children, Grant?" said Thomas Blackwell, sliding a crystal tumbler of scotch toward Maxwell. "My PR team would have advised against adopting even one. The market doesn't trust sentimentality." Maxwell accepted the drink but didn't sip. "I wasn't aware I needed permission from the market for personal decisions, Thomas." Eleanor Wellington, one of the few women in the room and head of a major foundation, approached. "Ignore them, Maxwell. They're just shocked to discover one of their own might actually have a heart." The banter continued through dinner, oscillating between veiled concern and outright skepticism. Maxwell maintained his composure, though internally, his patience waned. "Level with us, Grant," said Howard Pierce over dessert, leaning in conspiratorially. "Is this some elaborate tax strategy, or a preemptive move against that Senate committee investigating corporate philanthropy?" Before Maxwell could respond, his phone vibrated. A text from Mrs. Harper. "Sophie won't sleep until you're home for goodnight story. Your promise." Maxwell stood abruptly. "Gentlemen, Eleanor. Duty calls." "Parental duty," mocked Pierce. "How? Domestic." "Indeed," Maxwell replied coolly, "a concept as foreign to some as basic human decency." The silence that followed him to the doctor was more satisfying than any business deal. At home, Maxwell found Sophie waiting in the grand library, a storybook clutched to her chest. Her face brightened when she spotted him. "You came back. Mrs. Harper said you might be too busy." "I promised, didn't I?" Maxwell said, loosening his tie and settling beside her. From the doorway, Victoria watched with undisguised curiosity. She'd served Maxwell faithfully for years but had never seen this side of him. "The board meeting tomorrow," she said when Sophie had finally fallen asleep. "They're concerned about your new priorities." Maxwell's jaw tightened. "Schedule it for 3 p.m. instead of 9 a.m. I promised Daniel I'd attend his science presentation." Victoria's eyebrows rose, but she nodded. "There's something else." A letter came. "For you, marked personal." She handed him an envelope. "The sender is Rebecca Winters." Maxwell froze, his heart stuttering. "Rebecca?" I thought the name sounded familiar. With unsteady hands, Maxwell opened the envelope. Inside was a yellowed newspaper clipping, his own face, 20 years younger, announcing his first major acquisition. Below it, in familiar handwriting, "You became exactly who you always wanted to be. I hope it was worth it." No return address, no explanation, just a ghost from his past, suddenly reaching through the years. "Sir?" Victoria prompted. "Is everything all right?" Maxwell tucked the clipping away. "Fine, just an old acquaintance." That night, unable to sleep, Maxwell wandered the halls of his changing home. From Emily's room came the soft tapping of a keyboard. The girl wrote constantly, processing her world through words. In Daniel's room, books lay open beside complex diagrams. Sophie's art supplies were neatly arranged, waiting for morning inspiration. From Michael's room came soft breathing, his nightlight casting star patterns across the ceiling. These children, mysterious, challenging, increasingly precious, had upended his orderly existence. And now, Rebecca's message, cryptic and accusatory. Maxwell paused at a window overlooking the moonlit grounds. For the first time in decades, Grant Enterprises didn't consume his every thought. Something more important had taken its place. "Welcome," Maxwell said, suddenly aware of how forbidding his home must seem. "I hope you'll be comfortable here." "Why?" Emily asked, the same direct gaze he'd first encountered. "Why us?" Maxwell had asked himself the same question countless times over the past weeks. "I don't have a rational answer," he admitted. "Sometimes the most important decisions aren't rational." Emily's posture remained guarded, but she nodded slightly. The first days were awkward. Maxwell, accustomed to commanding boardrooms, found himself floundering at breakfast tables and bedtime routines. The children, conditioned to expect disappointment, approached their new reality with caution. On the fourth night, a thunderstorm rattled the mansion's windows. Maxwell was reviewing contracts when Mrs. Harper knocked urgently. "It's Sophie, sir. She's inconsolable, afraid of storms." Maxwell found the little girl huddled under her blankets, trembling. "Sophie?" he said softly. "I want Emily," came the muffled response. "She's sleeping. Can I help instead?" Sophie peeked out. "Do you know the thunder song?" "I don't." "Will you teach me?" After a moment's hesitation, Sophie began a simple melody about thunder being just clouds playing drums. Maxwell listened, then joined her uncertain voice with his rusty baritone. They sang until the storm passed, Sophie eventually drifting to sleep. As Maxwell stood to leave, he found Emily watching from the doorway. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I wanted to." A hint of something, perhaps trust, flickered across Emily's face. "She hasn't sung that since our mother died." Maxwell nodded, understanding the weight of this information. "Good night, Emily." "Good night, Maxwell." It wasn't Dad or even Mr. Grant, but it was something. A beginning. The next morning, Maxwell entered the kitchen to find all 4 children already seated, an unexpected sight. "I hope we did this right," Emily said, gesturing to the clumsily set table. "We made breakfast. Toast was burnt, orange juice sloshed over glass rims, but their expressions, hopeful, uncertain, made it the most important meal of Maxwell Grant's life." As he sat down among them, the mansion seemed to exhale, as if finally fulfilling its purpose after years of emptiness. The mahogany doors of the Metropolitan Club swung open as Maxwell entered, nodding to the doorman who had greeted him by name for 20 years. Every month, New York's financial elite gathered here, men and women who controlled the fate of global markets over brandy and cigars. Tonight, however, was different. Conversations paused as Maxwell crossed the room, whispers following in his wake. "Maxwell, heard you've become a regular Father Flanagan," called Philip Westover, CEO of a rival investment firm. "What's next? A reality show?" Polite laughter rippled through the group gathered around him. "4 children, Grant," said Thomas Blackwell, sliding a crystal tumbler of scotch toward Maxwell. "My PR team would have advised against adopting even 1. The market doesn't trust sentimentality." Maxwell accepted the drink but didn't sip. "I wasn't aware I needed permission from the market for personal decisions, Thomas." Eleanor Wellington, one of the few women in the room and head of a major foundation, approached. "Ignore them, Maxwell. They're just shocked to discover one of their own might actually have a heart." The banter continued through dinner, oscillating between veiled concern and outright skepticism. Maxwell maintained his composure, though internally his patience waned. "Level with us, Grant," said Howard Pierce over dessert, leaning in conspiratorially. "Is this some elaborate tax strategy, or a preemptive move against that Senate committee investigating corporate philanthropy?" Before Maxwell could respond, his phone vibrated. A text from Mrs. Harper. "Sophie won't sleep until you're home for good night story, your promise." Maxwell stood abruptly. "Gentlemen, Eleanor, duty calls." "Parental duty," mocked Pierce. "How domestic." "Indeed," Maxwell replied coolly. "A concept as foreign to some as basic human decency." The silence that followed him to the door was more satisfying than any business deal. At home, Maxwell found Sophie waiting in the grand library, a storybook clutched to her chest. Her face brightened when she spotted him. "You came back. Mrs. Harper said you might be too busy." "I promised, didn't I?" Maxwell said, loosening his tie and settling beside her. From the doorway, Victoria watched with undisguised curiosity. She'd served Maxwell faithfully for years but had never seen this side of him. "The board meeting tomorrow," she said when Sophie had finally fallen asleep. "They're concerned about your new priorities." Maxwell's jaw tightened. "Schedule it for 3 p.m. instead of 9 a.m. I promised Daniel I'd attend his science presentation." Victoria's eyebrows rose, but she nodded. "There's something else. A letter came for you, marked personal." She handed him an envelope. "The sender is Rebecca Winters." Maxwell froze, his heart stuttering. "Rebecca?" I thought the name sounded familiar. With unsteady hands, Maxwell opened the envelope. Inside was a yellowed newspaper clipping. His own face, 20 years younger, announcing his first major acquisition. Below it, in familiar handwriting, "You became exactly who you always wanted to be. I hope it was worth it." No return address. No explanation. Just a ghost from his past, suddenly reaching through the years. "Sir?" Victoria prompted. "Is everything all right?" Maxwell tucked the clipping away. "Fine. Just an old acquaintance." That night, unable to sleep, Maxwell wandered the halls of his changing home. From Emily's room came the soft tapping of a keyboard. The girl wrote constantly, processing her world through words. In Daniel's room, books lay open beside complex diagrams. Sophie's art supplies were neatly arranged, waiting for morning inspiration. From Michael's room came soft breathing, his nightlight casting star patterns across the ceiling. These children, mysterious, challenging, increasingly precious, had upended his orderly existence. And now Rebecca's message, cryptic and accusatory. Maxwell paused at a window overlooking the moonlit grounds. For the first time in decades, Grant Enterprises didn't consume his every thought. Something more important had taken its place. Autumn painted the Westchester estate in brilliant hues as Maxwell Grant attempted something entirely new, creating family traditions. The mansion's sprawling backyard, previously maintained for appearances rather than enjoyment, now hosted 4 children discovering its potential. "Watch me, Maxwell," called Michael, balancing precariously on a fallen log. The normally reserved boy had gradually emerged from his shell over the past 2 months, particularly when outdoors. "Careful," Maxwell replied, fighting the unfamiliar urge to rush forward and prevent a potential fall. From her perch beneath an ancient maple, Emily looked up from her journal. "He's fine. He has excellent balance." Maxwell nodded, accepting her assessment. He'd learned that Emily's knowledge of her siblings' capabilities far exceeded his own, a reality both humbling and occasionally painful. "Mr. Grant," called Daniel, appearing with a collection of leaves. "Did you know that sugar maples develop the strongest red pigmentation when nights are cold but days remain warm?" "I didn't," Maxwell admitted. "Interesting." "I'm cataloging the species on the property," Daniel explained, his earnest expression reminiscent of a young professor. "It's for a biodiversity project." Maxwell knelt to examine Daniel's collection, recognizing an opportunity for connection. "When I was about your age, I created a mineral classification system for rocks I found around our apartment building." Daniel's eyes widened. "You liked science too?" "I did," Maxwell said, realizing how long it had been since he'd thought about that passion. "I still do, though financial systems eventually became my focus." Sophie appeared, her curls wind-blown, cheeks flushed with exertion. "Maxwell, I made you something." She thrust a slightly crumpled paper into his hands, a watercolor depicting 5 figures holding hands beneath colorful trees. "It's us?" he asked carefully. Sophie nodded vigorously. "Our first family autumn. Mrs. Harper said we should make memories, so I painted one." Maxwell studied the image, unexpectedly moved by her inclusion of him in this family portrait. "It's beautiful, Sophie." "Thank you." Later that evening, after homework was reviewed and younger children tucked in, Maxwell found Emily in the library, surrounded by college brochures. "Harvard, Princeton, Yale," he observed. "Ambitious." Emily's expression remained guarded. "Just research. I know they're expensive." "Cost isn't an issue," Maxwell interrupted gently. "Your education, all of your educations are top priority." Emily studied him, that evaluating gaze that seemed to peel away his carefully constructed facades. "Why are you doing all this?" "Really?" The question hung between them, one Maxwell still struggled to answer. Before he could formulate a response, Emily continued, "You had this perfect organized life where chaos, we break things, make messes, demand attention. What do you get from this arrangement?" Maxwell considered deflecting, offering the polished response he'd prepared for business associates and media inquiries. Instead, surprising himself, he chose honesty. "I had everything society claims brings fulfillment, yet returned each night to emptiness," he said quietly. "That day at Riverdale something changed. I can't explain it rationally." Emily's skepticism remained visible, but a hint of understanding flickered in her eyes. "Daniel thinks you're a scientific genius. Sophie believes you're magical. Michael just watches everything, filing it away." "And you?" Maxwell asked. Emily closed the Harvard brochure. I'm still deciding. Maxwell nodded, accepting this provisional status. Fair enough. As he turned to leave, Emily added, Sophie has an art showcase next Thursday. It's important to her. I'll be there, Maxwell promised. Walking back to his study, Maxwell realized his calendar was increasingly populated with science fairs, art shows, and parent-teacher conferences, commitments that now took precedence over board meetings and investor calls. His world had tilted on its axis, priorities rearranging themselves around 4 young lives that somehow, inexplicably, had become the center of his universe. The Taylor merger is non-negotiable, Maxwell stated firmly, his voice carrying across the Grant Enterprises boardroom. The quarterly meeting had stretched into its 3rd hour, and tensions were rising. The timing is problematic, argued CFO Harrison Wells. With market volatility and your personal situation, shareholders are nervous. Maxwell's eyes narrowed. My personal situation? Richard Hargrove cleared his throat. Maxwell, there's concern that your focus has shifted. The adoption has become tabloid fodder. There's a perception issue. My children are not a perception issue, Maxwell replied coldly. The phrase my children hung in the air. 6 months ago, such words would have been unimaginable from his lips. Victoria entered discreetly, passing Maxwell a note. Daniel's school called. Emergency. Maxwell stood immediately. Meeting adjourned. Victoria will reschedule. We haven't finalized the Taylor terms, protested Wells. Then they'll wait, Maxwell replied, already striding toward the door. Family emergency. 30 minutes later, Maxwell's Bentley pulled up to Westchester Academy, an exclusive private school where tuition rivaled college costs. He found Daniel sitting outside the headmaster's office, sporting a bruised cheek and torn blazer. Daniel, Maxwell said, kneeling to eye level. What happened? The boy's eyes were red but defiant. I'm not apologizing. Inside, Headmaster Phillips sat behind an imposing desk, alongside another boy with a bloody nose and his father. Maxwell recognized Charles Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Pharmaceuticals and a major Grant Enterprises client. Mr. Grant, Phillips began, I'm afraid Daniel struck Justin during recess. We have a zero-tolerance policy for violence. He deserved it, Daniel muttered. Daniel, Maxwell cautioned, then addressed Phillips. What precipitated this incident? Justin, Whitmore smirked slightly while his father bristled. Does it matter? Your ward attacked my son. Maxwell's tone remained even. It matters to me. Daniel looked up. He said we weren't a real family, that you only adopted us as a publicity stunt, and would send us back when you got bored. Maxwell felt a surge of protective fury. I see. Boys will be boys, Whitmore said dismissively, though some clearly lack proper upbringing. Charles, Maxwell said, his business smile not reaching his eyes. Before you continue, you should know that Whitmore Pharmaceuticals' exclusivity contract with Grant Medical Supply is approaching renewal. The implication hung clearly. Whitmore's expression hardened. Furthermore, Maxwell continued, turning to Phillips, if Westchester Academy tolerates bullying based on family structure, perhaps we should reconsider the significant donation earmarked for your new science wing. Phillips paled. Mr. Grant, I assure you, Daniel defended himself against cruelty, Maxwell interrupted. I expect both appropriate disciplinary action against Justin and a school-wide initiative addressing family diversity. On the drive home, silence filled the car until Daniel finally spoke. Are you mad at me? Maxwell considered his answer carefully. Violence shouldn't be your first response, but I understand why you were upset. Those things Justin said, they're not true. I know, Daniel replied, surprising Maxwell. That's why I got so angry. He hesitated. You're our family now. Something tightened in Maxwell's chest. Yes, we are family. That evening, Maxwell received a call from Richard Hargrove. The Whitmore contract, Charles is threatening to walk. Let him, Maxwell replied. That's a $50 million relationship, Maxwell. And Daniel is my son. The words came naturally now. Some things aren't negotiable, Richard. After hanging up, Maxwell found Emily in the doorway of his study. I heard about what happened today, she said, with Daniel. Maxwell prepared for criticism. Emily remained the most guarded of the four. Instead, she simply said, "Thank you for believing him." "Of course," Maxwell replied. "Why wouldn't I?" Emily shrugged, but her expression had softened. Most adults take the easy way out. As she turned to leave, Maxwell realized something fundamental had shifted. In defending Daniel, he had unknowingly passed some crucial test in Emily's eyes, moving one step closer to earning her trust. "But why can't we go to the charity gala?" Sophie asked, her bottom lip protruding slightly. "I have a new dress and everything." Maxwell adjusted his bow tie, watching his reflection in the hallway mirror. "It's a very late event, Sophie. Besides, Mrs. Harper has planned a movie night for you all." The annual Grant Foundation Gala was Maxwell's most prominent social event, bringing together New York's elite to raise millions for children's education. Ironically, this year he found himself reluctant to attend, preferring the chaotic comfort of his new family life. "You look handsome," Michael offered quietly, hovering nearby. Of all the children, he remained the most enigmatic, observing more than participating. "Thank you, Michael," Maxwell replied, touched by the rare compliment. Emily descended the stairs carrying a textbook. 9 months into their new life together, she had gradually abandoned her role as perpetual guardian, allowing herself occasional moments of adolescent normalcy. "There's a thunderstorm forecast," she said matter-of-factly. "Sophie might need you." Maxwell frowned. Sophie's storm anxiety remained intense. "Perhaps I should stay." "We'll handle it," Emily interrupted. Surprising. Mrs. Harper knows the thunder song now, and I'll be here." The unspoken message was clear. They were learning to function as a unit, not solely dependent on Maxwell. "Call if you need anything," he said, accepting Victoria's arrival as his cue to depart. The gala proceeded as expected. Champagne flowed, checkbooks opened, and Maxwell delivered a polished speech about educational opportunity. Yet throughout the evening, his thoughts repeatedly drifted homeward. "Fatherhood has changed you," observed Eleanor Wellington, appearing beside him on the terrace where he'd escaped for a moment of quiet. Maxwell smiled wryly. "Is that a criticism or observation?" "Decidedly an observation," Eleanor replied. "You seem more human." Before Maxwell could respond, his phone vibrated. A text from Mrs. Harper. "Storm arrived early. Sophie very upset. Emily trying but asking for you." "Excuse me," Maxwell said immediately. "Family emergency." Eleanor nodded knowingly. "Go. They need you more than these socialites need another speech." 30 minutes later, Maxwell rushed through his front door, still in formal attire, to find the living room transformed. Blankets and pillows formed an elaborate fort, flashlights creating star-like patterns on the ceiling. From within he heard Sophie's distinctive giggle, unexpected during a thunderstorm. "Hello?" he called, bending to peer inside. All 4 children lounged in pajamas amid the makeshift shelter. "Maxwell," Sophie exclaimed, "we made a storm castle." "I see that," he replied, bewildered. "You seem okay." Emily sat cross-legged, her laptop open. "We found storm sounds on YouTube and played them at low volume, gradually increasing to desensitize her. Daniel's idea." Daniel nodded seriously. "Exposure therapy. I read about it." Maxwell turned to Mrs. Harper, who stood nearby with an amused expression. "I thought Sophie was upset." "She was initially," the housekeeper explained. "But then they implemented their plan. Sophie insisted on texting you herself, but Emily thought it might make you worry unnecessarily." Maxwell looked back at the children, his children, working together to solve a problem. Something inside him broke open, flooding with emotion he couldn't quite name. "May I join you?" he asked, gesturing to the fort. After a moment of silent consultation, they shifted to make room. Maxwell crawled in, his tailored tuxedo incongruous among cartoon-printed pajamas. "We're telling stories about where we were born," Michael explained. "Real or imagined." As rain drummed against the windows and thunder rolled in the distance, Sophie curled against Maxwell's side, unafraid. Daniel launched into an elaborate tale about being hatched from a meteor, while Emily watched Maxwell's reaction, testing, always testing, to see if he would play along or dismiss such childish fantasies. "What about you, Maxwell?" Sophie asked eventually. "Where were you born?" Instead of the abbreviated biography he typically offered at business functions, Maxwell found himself sharing stories of his humble beginnings, his mother's small apartment, the scholarship that changed his life, and yes, even fragments about Rebecca. As the storm gradually subsided outside, something new solidified within the blanket fort. A trust, a connection, a family finding its unique rhythm in the most unexpected of circumstances. "Dad, have you seen my acceptance letter? I need it for the registration portal." Emily's voice echoed through the mansion, now filled with the comfortable clutter of family life. Maxwell looked up from his laptop, where quarterly reports had been replaced by college financial aid documents. "Check the folder in my study." 4. Years had transformed both the Grant mansion and its occupants. At 19, Emily had blossomed from a guarded, protective teenager into a confident young woman bound for Columbia University. The wariness in her eyes had given way to determination, though she retained her protective instincts toward her siblings. "Found it," she called back. Maxwell smiled, remembering her face when the acceptance had arrived. The tentative way she'd asked if he'd attend Parents' Weekend, as if still uncertain of her place in his heart. "Dad," Daniel appeared, now 14 and nearly as tall as Maxwell. "Can we discuss the science symposium in Boston next month? I've been invited to present my environmental impact model." "Of course," Maxwell replied. "Have Victoria block the dates." Daniel's scientific aptitude had flourished beyond anyone's expectations, his research on microplastics already garnering attention from major universities. The shy, analytical boy remained, but confidence had replaced his former hesitancy. The sound of piano music drifted from the music room, Michael practicing for his upcoming recital. At 12, his quiet observation had evolved into artistic expression, his communication most fluent through melodies rather than words. "Dad, look!" Sophie burst into the room, her perpetual energy undiminished at 11. She thrust a vibrant canvas toward him. "It's for the Adoption Day celebration." The painting depicted their family beside the fountain in the garden, the perspective slightly askew, but the emotion unmistakable. 4 years ago, Maxwell had established Adoption Day as a family holiday, marking the court date that officially made them Grants. "It's beautiful, Sophie," Maxwell said, genuinely impressed by her developing talent. "Perfect centerpiece for the dinner table." Sophie beamed, her curls now tamed into intricate braids that Mrs. Harper had learned to master. "Emily's making her special pasta. Daniel's doing science decorations, and Michael composed a song." "Sounds perfect," Maxwell replied, marveling at how completely these children had claimed his heart. Victoria appeared in the doorway, her role having evolved to incorporate this new family dynamic. "Mr. Grant, the foundation board is waiting." On the conference call. 10 minutes, Maxwell promised. The John and Rebecca Grant Foundation, established 2 years prior, focused on funding adoptions for difficult-to-place children. Maxwell had named it partly for himself, but primarily for Rebecca, whose memory had softened with time into something bittersweet rather than painful. That evening, as they gathered around the dining table celebrating their 4th year as a family, Maxwell observed each child with quiet wonder. They debated and laughed, interrupted and teased each other, all behaviors that would have horrified him in his previous life. "Speech," Sophie demanded, banging her fork against her water glass until Emily gently lowered her hand. Maxwell cleared, his throat uncharacteristically emotional. 4 years ago, I made the best decision of my life. I thought I was rescuing 4 children, but the truth is you rescued me." He raised his glass. "To family," Not the one we're born into, but the one we build together. As their glasses clinked, Maxwell caught Emily watching him, her expression thoughtful. Later, as they cleared dishes together, Maxwell Grant, billionaire, CEO, now regularly performed kitchen duties. She spoke quietly. "Sometimes I still wonder why you chose us." Maxwell considered his response carefully. "Perhaps we chose each other." Emily nodded, seeming satisfied with this answer. "Well, whatever cosmic accident brought us together, I'm glad it did." Maxwell smiled, watching his other children through the kitchen doorway, Daniel explaining some scientific concept while Sophie and Michael listened with varying degrees of comprehension. "Not an accident," he murmured, more to himself than Emily. "Family. I don't need you to fix this, Dad." Emily's voice echoed through the mansion, the door to her bedroom slamming with such force that picture frames rattled on nearby walls. Maxwell stood in the hallway, stunned by the sudden explosion of anger. Home for winter break during her sophomore year at Columbia, Emily had been uncharacteristically withdrawn for days. His attempts to connect had finally triggered this outburst. Daniel appeared from his room, headphones around his neck. "What happened?" Maxwell sighed, running a hand through his increasingly silver hair. "I wish I knew." At 15, Daniel had grown into a thoughtful young man, often serving as the family's voice of reason. "She's been texting someone continuously since she got home, and she's been researching something she closes whenever anyone walks by." Maxwell nodded, appreciating Daniel's observational skills. "Any theories?" "Several," Daniel replied. "Most likely she's pursuing information about our biological parents. Emily's age makes her more susceptible to identity questions, statistically speaking." Maxwell felt a tightening in his chest. The children's origins had never been a forbidden topic in their home, but neither had it been frequently discussed. The limited information from Riverdale home had been shared years ago. Their mother had died, their father unknown. "Should I give her space or push?" Maxwell asked, genuinely valuing Daniel's insight. Daniel considered. "Initial space followed by direct approach. Emily responds to honesty above all else." That evening, Maxwell knocked gently on Emily's door, a cup of her favorite tea in hand. After a moment of silence, he heard a quiet, "Come in." Emily sat cross-legged on her bed, surrounded by papers and her laptop. Her eyes were red-rimmed but determined. "Peace offering," Maxwell said, offering the tea. Emily accepted it with a slight smile. "I'm sorry I yelled." "I'm sorry I pushed," Maxwell replied, perching on the edge of her bed. "Want to tell me what's going on?" Emily took a deep breath. "I've been trying to find out more about my birth parents, about all of our biological origins." Maxwell nodded, having prepared himself for this possibility. "That's completely natural. Emily, you know I've always supported your right to explore that part of your identity." "That's just it," Emily said, her voice cracking slightly. "I don't know what my identity is anymore. I'm Emily Grant, daughter of billionaire Maxwell Grant, attending an Ivy League university where everyone assumes I'm there because of my name or my dad's donations." She gestured to her laptop screen, which displayed a DNA testing service. "I just want to know where I come from, who I am beneath all this." Her hand waved vaguely, encompassing the mansion and the privileged life they now led. "I understand," Maxwell said gently. "I've never pretended to have all the answers, but I do know this. Who you are isn't defined by DNA or bank accounts. It's defined by your choices, your values, your actions." Emily's shoulders slumped. "But how do I know which parts are really me? Sometimes I feel like I'm playing a role, grateful adopted daughter of Maxwell Grant. What if the real me is someone completely different?" Maxwell considered her words carefully. "Perhaps the real you isn't a fixed destination, but something you're continuously discovering. And Emily..." He reached for her hand. "Questioning is part of that journey." After a moment, Emily squeezed his fingers. Would you be upset if I did this DNA test? If I tried to find out more?" "Never," Maxwell assured her. I'll help you if you want. Whatever you discover doesn't change who we are to each other. Emily wiped away a tear. I don't even know what I'm hoping to find. Maybe nothing, maybe everything. Maxwell nodded, understanding her confusion. That's okay too. As he stood to leave, Emily called softly. Dad? Yes? Thank you. For letting me figure this out even when it's messy. Maxwell smiled. That's what family does, Emily. We stand by each other through the messy parts. The gentle spring rain tapped against the windows of Maxwell's study as he reviewed the research Emily had compiled over the past 2 months. DNA test results, birth records, medical histories, all meticulously organized in a folder labeled Project Origins. The DNA testing confirmed what we already knew, Emily explained, pacing the room. The 4 of us are biological siblings, but I've hit a wall trying to trace our birth mother beyond the name Rebecca Wilson. Maxwell's heart skipped at the name. Rebecca. He'd long suspected a connection, but hearing it confirmed made his chest tighten. Wilson is a common surname, he said carefully. Do you have any other identifying information? Emily shook her head, frustration evident. Just that she was 26 when she died giving birth to us. No father listed on any documents. Riverdale received us through a county hospital transfer. Most records were damaged in that storage fire they had 15 years ago. Maxwell studied his daughter's expression. The determination mixed with vulnerability. At 20, Emily stood at the threshold of adulthood, increasingly reflective about her place in the world. What would you hope to find? He asked gently. Emily sank into the leather chair across from him. Photos, maybe. Medical history, definitely. Sophie should know if there are any hereditary conditions for her health forms. And just stories? Who she was, what she loved. She hesitated. Maybe even who our biological father might be. Maxwell nodded, understanding her yearning. I'd like to help if you'll let me. I have resources that might uncover information conventional searches wouldn't. You'd do that? Emily asked, surprised. You're not worried about what we might find? Maxwell's smile was bittersweet. Emily, I became your father because I chose to be, not because of biology. Nothing you discover will change that. The search intensified over the following weeks. Maxwell quietly assigned a specialized team from Grant Enterprises to assist, though he kept certain parameters confidential. The children were informed of the investigation, each responding differently. Daniel approached it as a scientific puzzle. Sophie created a painting of what she imagined their birth mother looked like, while Michael remained characteristically contemplative. 3 weeks later, Maxwell's private investigator requested an urgent meeting. We found something unusual, sir, Jenkins said, sliding a folder across Maxwell's desk. The Rebecca Wilson who died giving birth to quadruplets at County General. We tracked her previous residence to an apartment in Brooklyn. Maxwell opened the folder, finding lease documents and a grainy photocopy of a driver's license. The face was blurred but achingly familiar. Her emergency contact was listed as Rebecca Winters, apparently her mother. Jenkins continued. We've been unable to locate this woman, but there's something else. He hesitated. The lease was co-signed by a Maxwell Grant. Maxwell stared at the document, seeing his own signature from 25 years earlier. The room seemed to tilt slightly. That's not possible, he whispered, though he knew immediately it was not only possible, but true. Sir, Jenkins said carefully. Were you acquainted with Ms. Wilson? Maxwell's mind raced through calculations and possibilities. Rebecca Wilson was Rebecca Winters before she married, he said slowly. We were involved during university. She disappeared from my life without explanation. According to hospital records, Jenkins added, Rebecca Wilson was pregnant with quadruplets, extremely rare naturally. The timing would align with when she left, Maxwell finished, the realization crashing over him like a wave. She was pregnant with my children. That evening, Maxwell sat alone in his study, dozens of photographs spread before him, Rebecca at university, laughing beside a younger version of himself. The pieces were falling into place with devastating clarity. Rebecca had left him, changed her name slightly, and faced pregnancy alone. She had died bringing their children into the world, and by some cosmic twist of fate he had found them again, drawn by an inexplicable connection he couldn't have possibly understood. The question remained, how would he tell them? The autumn leaves swirled around Maxwell's feet as he crossed the Grant Enterprises Plaza, nodding to the security guards who greeted him by name. At 58, Maxwell Grant cut an impressive figure, silver hair perfectly styled, bespoke suit impeccable, his stride purposeful and confident. Only those closest to him might notice the slight shadow beneath his eyes, the occasional distant gaze during meetings, the way he sometimes paused mid-sentence as if catching an errant thought. "Mr. Grant, the Tokyo investors are on line 3, Victoria called as he passed her desk. "And the quarterly reports need your signature by noon." Maxwell nodded, accepting the stack of documents she offered. "And the specialist appointment?" "Confirmed. For 2 p.m., Victoria replied quietly. "I've cleared your schedule." Inside his office, Maxwell moved through his morning routine with practiced efficiency, though his focus repeatedly drifted to the folder hidden in his desk drawer, the one containing evidence that the 4 children he'd adopted were, in fact, his biological offspring. 2 weeks had passed since the discovery, and still he hadn't found the courage to share this extraordinary revelation. The Tokyo call proceeded smoothly until Maxwell suddenly felt his vision blur. The room tilted alarmingly, voices on the speakerphone becoming distant and distorted. "Mr. Grant, are you still there?" Maxwell tried to respond, but his words slurred incomprehensibly. The last thing he registered was Victoria's alarmed face as she rushed into the office, and then darkness. He awoke to the steady beep of hospital monitors and Daniel's worried face hovering nearby. "Dad!" Daniel exclaimed, relief washing over his features. "You're awake." Maxwell tried to speak, finding his throat parched. Daniel quickly offered a cup of water with a straw. "What happened?" Maxwell managed after several sips. "You collapsed during a conference call," Daniel explained, his scientific precision momentarily overcome by emotion. "You've been unconscious for almost 6 hours." Maxwell glanced around the private hospital room, noting the evening shadows stretching across the floor. "Your siblings. Emily's flying back from Boston tonight. Sophie and Michael are with Mrs. Harper in the waiting room." Daniel hesitated. "Victoria called us immediately." Maxwell nodded, attempting to sit up before a wave of dizziness forced him back against the pillows. "Dr. Abrams wants to speak with you," Daniel said, pressing the call button. "They've run several tests while you were unconscious." Dr. Abrams entered moments later, a tall woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. After checking Maxwell's vitals, she glanced meaningfully at Daniel. "It's all right," Maxwell said. "He can stay." The doctor nodded. "Mr. Grant, your collapse wasn't caused by stress or exhaustion as we initially suspected. Your blood work shows significant abnormalities, and the MRI revealed concerning masses in your bone marrow." Maxwell felt a cold certainty settle in his chest. "Cancer?" "A rare form of leukemia," Dr. Abrams confirmed. "We need to perform a bone marrow biopsy to confirm, but the preliminary indicators are quite clear." Daniel's face had gone pale, his analytical mind no doubt already calculating survival statistics. "What's the treatment protocol?" Maxwell asked, his business instincts kicking in. "Identify the problem, determine solutions, implement action plan. Standard approach would be aggressive chemotherapy," Dr. Abrams explained. "However, given the specific markers we're seeing, your best chance for long-term remission would be a bone marrow transplant from a compatible donor. Siblings or children typically offer the highest probability of compatibility," Daniel interjected, his voice slightly unsteady. Dr. Abrams nodded. "Exactly. Do you have any biological relatives, Mr. Grant?" The irony of the question struck Maxwell with such force that he almost laughed. After 25 years believing himself alone in the world, he'd discovered he had 4 biological children, exactly when he might need them most. "Yes," Maxwell said quietly, meeting Daniel's confused gaze. "I believe I do." That night, As Sophie and Michael slept in hospital chairs pulled close to his bed, Maxwell watched the steady rise and fall of their breathing. Emily and Daniel had gone to arrange his discharge for the following day, insisting on taking him home rather than remaining hospitalized. The truth he'd been withholding now carried new weight. These children, his children in every sense, might literally hold the key to his survival. Yet how could he tell them now without seeming manipulative? How could he ask them to be tested without revealing the extraordinary connection that had brought them together? As dawn broke over the Manhattan skyline visible from his hospital window, Maxwell Grant made his decision. Whatever happened, whether they proved compatible donors or not, whether they embraced this revelation or resented it, his children deserved the truth. The crackling fireplace cast dancing shadows across the Grant Mansion's living room, where the family had gathered at Maxwell's insistence following his return from the hospital. Though he downplayed his condition, the gravity of the situation was evident in the worried glances his children exchanged. "Before we discuss my treatment options," Maxwell began, his voice steadier than he felt, "there's something important I need to share with you all." Emily sat forward, her intuition already sensing this was connected to their heritage search. At 20, she'd developed a perceptiveness that sometimes unnerved Maxwell. "Dad, if this is about the adoption research, it can wait," she said. "Your health is what matters now." Maxwell shook his head. "They're connected, actually." He reached for the folder that had been burning a hole in his desk drawer for weeks. "Jenkins found something unexpected during the investigation, something I've been trying to find the right moment to share." Daniel, now 16 and increasingly resembling Maxwell in mannerisms, analyzed his father's expression. "You knew our birth mother," he stated rather than asked. Maxwell nodded, impressed as always by Daniel's intuition. "Yes. Very well, in fact." He opened the folder, removing a faded photograph, himself and Rebecca at graduation, young and full of promise. Sophie gasped, leaning forward to study the image. At 13, her artistic eye immediately grasped the significance. "She looks like Emily around the eyes, and Michael has her smile." Her name was Rebecca Winters, though she later used Wilson, Maxwell explained, his voice threatening to break. "We were together at university. I loved her very much." Michael, normally so quiet, spoke up. "Why did she leave you?" "I never knew," Maxwell admitted. "She disappeared from my life without explanation. I now believe she discovered she was pregnant and chose to face it alone." Emily's eyes widened as understanding dawned. "Are you saying?" Maxwell nodded, tears forming despite his attempts at composure. "According to all evidence Jenkins gathered, Rebecca was carrying quadruplets when she left. The timing, the rare occurrence of natural quadruplets, her changed name, it all points to one conclusion. We're your biological children," Daniel stated, the scientist in him connecting the final dots. The silence that followed felt eternal, broken only by the crackling fire and the ticking grandfather clock. Sophie was the first to move, launching herself across the room to wrap her arms around Maxwell. "I knew it. I always felt like we belonged together." Maxwell held her tightly, watching the others for their reactions. Michael seemed contemplative, processing this revelation in his measured way. Daniel was clearly calculating probabilities, the statistical unlikelihood of such a reunion. Emily remained perfectly still, tears streaming silently down her face. "Emily?" Maxwell said gently. "All this time," she whispered. "All this time searching for our origins, and we were already home." Dr. Abrams arrived the following morning, having agreed to conduct the compatibility testing at the mansion rather than the hospital. As she prepared her equipment, she explained the process to the assembled family. "The likelihood of siblings matching as donors ranges from 25–30%, she said, prepping the first collection kit. "But full siblings, especially identical multiples, have higher potential compatibility." "What about parent to child?" Daniel asked. "Less common," Dr. Abrams replied. "About 5% chance typically, Maxwell watched as each child willingly offered their blood samples, even Michael, who hated needles. Their immediate willingness to be tested, without hesitation or question, moved him deeply. Results should be available in 48 hours, Dr. Abrams said, packing her samples. We'll test all 4 children and rank compatibility if matches are found. After she left, the family settled into an anxious wait. The revelation of their biological connection had created a strange new atmosphere, familiar yet altered, as if they were seeing each other through fresh eyes. 2 days later, Dr. Abrams' call came. Maxwell answered on speakerphone. The children gathered around his study desk. Mr. Grant, her voice crackled through the line. I've never seen anything like this in my career. Maxwell's heart sank. No matches? Quite the opposite, she replied, audible amazement in her voice. All 4 children are compatible donors. Not just compatible, they're perfect matches. The probability of this is, well, it's essentially impossible without some genetic explanation. As the call ended, Emily voiced what they were all thinking. It wasn't chance that brought us together, not at the orphanage, not now. Something led you to us. Maxwell looked at his 4 children, his biological children, and felt a sense of wonder overwhelm him. Perhaps some bonds are too strong to be broken, he said softly, even by time or circumstance. The transplant procedure will take place next Tuesday, Maxwell explained, reviewing Dr. Abrams's treatment plan with his children. Daniel's marrow showed the strongest cellular profile, so he'll be the primary donor. Daniel nodded seriously, having already immersed himself in medical literature about bone marrow donation. At 16, his analytical approach to challenges remained his defining characteristic. What happens after the transplant? Sophie asked, her artistic hands nervously, braiding and unbraiding a lock of her hair, a habit that emerged whenever she was anxious. Recovery will take several months, Maxwell answered honestly. I'll be immunocompromised while my body adjusts to Daniel's cells. Emily, home from college indefinitely to support the family, had transformed their East Wing into a recovery suite, researching hospital-grade sanitation procedures with characteristic thoroughness. We should finish organizing your personal papers before the procedure, she suggested, just to ensure everything's in order. Maxwell understood her unstated concern that, despite the excellent prognosis, she wanted to be prepared for any outcome. Good idea. The study files need sorting anyway. Michael, now 14 and still the quietest of the siblings, spoke up unexpectedly. What about the attic boxes? The ones from your old apartment that were never unpacked? Everyone turned to Michael, in surprise. Maxwell had indeed stored several boxes from his pre-mansion days in the attic, memorabilia and papers he'd never found time to sort through during the whirlwind of corporate expansion and, later, fatherhood. You're right, Maxwell acknowledged. I'd forgotten those existed. The attic expedition began that afternoon. Maxwell, still weakened from his preliminary treatments, supervised from an armchair as his children sifted through the physical artifacts of his earlier life. Look at this, Sophie exclaimed, extracting a yellowed newspaper from 1991. Dad's first company launch. You had a ponytail. Maxwell chuckled, accepting the paper. Different times. Daniel uncovered university textbooks filled with Maxwell's precise notes, while Emily found awards and certificates documenting his rise from scholarship student to business phenom. It was Michael who discovered the small locked box. What's this? He asked, presenting a weathered wooden case with a tarnished brass lock. Maxwell stared at it, recognition washing over him. Rebecca gave me that, he said softly. For my 21st birthday. I haven't opened it in decades. With trembling fingers, Maxwell produced a small key from his wallet, carried all these years without conscious purpose. The lock turned with surprising ease, revealing a collection of photographs, handwritten notes, and a sealed envelope with Maxwell written in familiar handwriting. This wasn't here before, he whispered, lifting the envelope. I would have remembered. The children gathered around as Maxwell carefully opened the seal, extracting a letter dated 23 years earlier, roughly 9 months before their birth. Dear Maxwell, he read aloud, his voice unsteady. If you're reading this, something has gone terribly wrong. I never meant to disappear without explanation, but I couldn't bear to disrupt the future you've worked so hard to build. The letter continued, revealing the truth they'd pieced together but with heartbreaking clarity. Rebecca had discovered her pregnancy, quadruplets, a shock to her doctors. Knowing Maxwell's single-minded focus on building his company, understanding his ambition and the sacrifices he'd already made, she had chosen to face parenthood alone rather than derail his dreams. I know you would have married me immediately, abandoned your business plans, sacrificed everything you've worked for. The letter continued. I couldn't let you choose between your dreams and us. Perhaps someday, when you've built your empire, and our children are older, fate will find a way to bring you together. I'm leaving this letter with my mother to deliver if anything happens to me. Maxwell's voice broke as he reached the final lines. Know that I loved you enough to let you go, and I love our children enough to believe they might someday know their father. All my love, Rebecca. Silence filled the attic as the letter's implications settled over them. Rebecca had intended for Maxwell to find their children if tragedy struck, but something had failed in that plan. Her mother had never delivered the letter. Instead, by some extraordinary alignment of circumstances, Maxwell had found them anyway. Emily was the first to speak, tears streaming down her face. She loved you both enough to let go and enough to leave a path back. Maxwell nodded, unable to speak, holding the last words from the woman he'd never stopped loving, the mother of the children who had become his salvation in more ways than one. Autumn sunlight filtered through the specially installed hospital-grade air purifiers in Maxwell's recovery suite, casting gentle patterns across his bed. 3 months had passed since the bone marrow transplant, and though the road to recovery had been arduous, today marked a significant milestone. Blood counts are continuing to improve, Dr. Abrams announced, reviewing the latest results on her tablet. Your body is accepting Daniel's cells remarkably well. Maxwell nodded weakly from his recliner, still thin and pale but with a new spark in his eyes. When can I resume normal activities? Dr. Abrams smiled. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Your immune system remains compromised, though it's strengthening daily. Short walks around the garden are fine, but public spaces are still off limits for at least another month. From his position beside the window, Daniel observed the exchange with scientific interest. At 16, he'd become an amateur expert in oncology and transplantation, monitoring his father's recovery with meticulous attention. The accelerated cell regeneration suggests his body recognizes the genetic similarity, Daniel noted. The parent-child biological connection is likely enhancing recovery rates. Dr. Abrams nodded. I believe you're right. I've never seen integration this smooth, even between identical siblings. After the doctor departed, Emily entered with a tray of specially prepared food, immune-safe and nutrient-dense, researched extensively during her unexpected semester away from college. You need to eat everything this time, she instructed, setting up the tray across Maxwell's lap. Your weight is still 10 pounds below baseline. Maxwell smiled at her mothering tone. Yes, ma'am. The roles in their household had shifted dramatically during his illness. The children, once dependent on his guidance and protection, now worked as a unit to support his recovery. Emily had become the family manager, Daniel the medical consultant, Sophie the emotional barometer, and Michael, surprisingly, the bridge between Maxwell and the outside world. The Tokyo expansion is proceeding on schedule, Michael reported, entering with his father's secure tablet. At 14, he had unexpectedly revealed a gift for business matters, serving as Maxwell's eyes and ears at Grant Enterprises, while Victoria managed day-to-day operations. Richard wants your input on the Thompson negotiation, Michael continued. I told him you'd review the terms this afternoon. Maxwell nodded, grateful for his son's unexpected aptitude. What's your assessment? Michael considered the question with characteristic thoughtfulness. Thompson's leverage is weaker than they're projecting. Their Midwest distribution is compromised by the shipping strikes. I'd hold firm on our original offer. A surge of pride washed over Maxwell. Exactly right. The afternoon passed peacefully, Maxwell working through limited business matters while his strength permitted. Sophie arrived after school, immediately setting up her easel near his recliner. "I'm painting your recovery journey," she explained, mixing colors with practiced precision. At 13, her artistic talent had blossomed into something remarkable. "This one shows your cells and Daniel's cells becoming friends." Maxwell chuckled at her characterization, but was touched by the metaphorical accuracy in her abstract rendering. Swirls of blue and gold intertwining to create new patterns. As evening approached, the family gathered for their now nightly dinner. In Maxwell's suite, a ritual begun during his most difficult days when leaving his bed had been impossible. Though he could now join them downstairs, they maintained the tradition, transforming his recovery space into the heart of their home. "I have an announcement," Emily said as they finished eating. "Columbia has approved my research proposal for a comprehensive study on adoptive families discovering biological connections. They're granting special dispensation for me to complete this semester remotely while I continue the research." "That's wonderful," Maxwell said, genuinely pleased. "Our story might help others," Emily continued. "Not the biological coincidence that's statistically impossible to replicate, but the psychological and emotional aspects of discovering unknown connections." Daniel nodded. "The probability calculations of our specific situation remain astronomical. I've been working with a geneticist at MIT who's fascinated by our case." "I've been thinking," Maxwell said, his voice growing stronger with purpose. "Rebecca's letter mentioned her mother, your grandmother, was supposed to deliver it. Perhaps she's still alive. Perhaps there's more family waiting to be discovered." The siblings exchanged glances, a new mission forming silently between them. Their search for identity had come full circle, revealing not only their origins but forging their bonds anew through shared purpose and mutual support. As night fell and Maxwell prepared for sleep, he watched his children, his miraculous, extraordinary children, and marveled at how completely they had transformed from orphans to family, from strangers to saviors, from his greatest surprise to his greatest strength. The Grant Foundation. Building gleamed in the morning sunlight, its modern facade of glass and steel rising 12 stories above Manhattan's bustling streets. 5 years had passed since Maxwell's diagnosis and miraculous recovery, and today marked the official opening of the Foundation's new headquarters. "Ready, Dad?" Emily asked, straightening Maxwell's tie with practiced fingers. At 25, she had grown into a poised young woman, her psychology doctorate nearly complete, and her research on adoptive family dynamics earning national recognition. Maxwell nodded, surveying his reflection in the lobby's mirrored wall. At 63, he appeared healthier than he had in decades. His posture straight, his eyes clear, the pallor of illness long replaced by vibrant energy. "As ready as I'll ever be." Daniel approached, tablet in hand, reviewing final details. At 21, he had already completed his master's degree in biochemical engineering and headed the Foundation's medical research division, focusing on improving bone marrow transplant protocols. The press is assembled, mayors running 10 minutes late. Governor just arrived. Sophie, now 18 and a freshman at Parsons School of Design, made a final adjustment to the massive canvas hanging in the lobby. Her most ambitious work yet, depicting intertwining family trees with branches that connected in unexpected patterns. "The lighting is perfect," she declared, her artist's eye critical but satisfied. Michael, 19 and already showing remarkable business acumen as an intern at Grant Enterprises, joined them last. Auditoriums full, standing room only. Maxwell looked at his 4 children, the greatest treasures of his life, and felt a wave of gratitude so profound it momentarily stole his voice. "Thank you," he finally managed. "All of you." The journey to this moment had been extraordinary. Maxwell's recovery had sparked a transformation that extended far beyond his physical healing. The Rebecca Wilson Grant Foundation had become his passion, dedicated to 3 core missions: supporting adoptive families, funding research on rare blood cancers, and establishing a database to help reunite biological relatives separated by circumstance. The elevator carried them to the auditorium level, where hundreds of guests awaited: medical professionals, adoption advocates, government officials, and families whose lives had been touched by the Foundation's work. As they stepped onto the stage, thunderous applause erupted. Maxwell approached the podium, his children flanking him in a united front that spoke volumes about their journey. The audience quieted as he began to speak. 25 years ago, a young woman named Rebecca made an impossible choice, a choice born of love and sacrifice. She believed she was setting two paths diverging, her children's lives and mine. What she couldn't have known was that those paths were destined to converge again. Maxwell's gaze swept the room, finding familiar faces. Victoria, whose loyalty had never wavered. Eleanor Wellington, whose friendship had sustained him through dark days. Even Richard Hargrove, who had finally come to understand that Maxwell's greatest legacy would not be financial. 5 years ago, I faced a diagnosis that should have ended my life. Instead, it revealed the most extraordinary truth, that the 4 children I had chosen to adopt years earlier were in fact my biological children. The odds against such a reunion are mathematically incalculable. Some might call it coincidence, others, divine intervention. Maxwell turned slightly toward his children, his voice softening. I prefer to think of it as the power of connection, an invisible thread that binds us to those we're meant to find, no matter what obstacles lie between. The culmination of the ceremony was the unveiling of the Foundation's centerpiece, a memorial garden designed by Sophie, featuring a bronze sculpture of a woman with outstretched arms. Rebecca's likeness, created from photographs and the memories Maxwell had shared, would stand as a permanent tribute to the woman whose love had set their extraordinary story in motion. As the ribbon was cut and applause filled the air, Maxwell felt a sense of completion wash over him. The emptiness that had once defined his existence had been filled beyond measure, not by wealth or achievement, but by the love of 4 remarkable young people who were his children in every sense. Chosen by his heart long before he knew they were connected by his blood. She would be proud, Emily whispered, slipping her hand into his. Of all of us. Maxwell nodded, unable to speak as emotion constricted his throat. The circle was complete. The family Rebecca had hoped would someday find each other had not only united but thrived, creating a legacy of love that would continue touching lives for generations to come. In the garden that afternoon, as guests departed and the excitement subsided, Maxwell stood alone before Rebecca's memorial. We found each other, he whispered to her bronze likeness, just as you hoped we would, and they're everything you could have dreamed. Brilliant, compassionate, extraordinary. A gentle breeze stirred the garden's newly planted trees, and for a moment, Maxwell could almost believe Rebecca had heard him. The invisible thread that had drawn him to his children, first to his heart and then to the truth of their connection, had completed its work, weaving separate lives into a tapestry of belonging that neither time nor circumstance could unravel. Maxwell Grant, once defined by wealth and power, had discovered the true meaning of riches in the most unexpected way, and as his children joined him in the garden, surrounding him with their presence, he knew with absolute certainty that no empire, no fortune, no achievement could ever compare to the miracle of family, a miracle that had been waiting for him all along.